Oh, it's perfect. All right, here we go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020 KDKA. This is Cars, Stars, and everything in between. He's the star, Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford, schultzford.com. I am Bubba from 100.7 Star. And if there is ever a star in the city of Pittsburgh, whether it's from seeing him or talk about voice recognition, hearing that voice, it is Rick Sebak, who is a legend in Pittsburgh.
Who would have ever thought that, huh?
But
that's actually one of our questions. Did you ever really aspire to be that? But before I ask that question, Rick, it's funny because we had you on once before, and then I was actually at one of the wonderful landmarks that you'll probably talk about, just walking through, and I saw somebody as I was walking through Woolies fish market, right?
Yep.
And I saw somebody that was greeting almost every person that went by and shaking the hand and stopping and doing, I call them a stop and chat. People would do their stop and chats. And I looked up and guess who it was? It was Rick Sebak. And I mean, Rick, honestly, you really are. You could be the mayor of the city. I guarantee you would be elected.
That's true.
Yeah, but would you want that?
Yeah.
Yes, I would not.
I want that. I don't think so.
Yes.
Could you imagine all the problems you'd have to deal with?
Yeah, but you know what? There wouldn't be problems, and really, because that's really the beginning of what Pittsburgh's all about, and that's kind of how we get to where we are. Yeah, I was so happy that I ran into you. So happy that you even remembered me, for heaven's sake. And of course, at that point, I invited you back on, and since then, I started to find out a little bit more. And I have a million questions, and I'm going to probably stop talking so that maybe Bubba even might have a question. He usually doesn't, but that was funny, Bubba.
I'm laughing.
But Rick, I see your podcast. I saw your reference to what a podcast is, and it really is just a talk show. I agree with you. And so here we are, and we're talking, and I love that. I love that you have taken the time for us. And I wonder, you've probably been asked this a million times. What makes Pittsburgh special to you?
Well, I mean, if you're going to talk in those big terms, I know what makes Pittsburgh special to me is the fact that it is continually surprising.
Expound on that, Rick. What's that mean?
I mean, I've been doing this for, I just had my 36th anniversary at WQED.
Wow.
So I've been making Pittsburgh shows for a long time, but there's still aspects of the city that I discover and find out about, and stories and all of that. And the fact that I am, people say, like, if you run out of ideas, I said, how could you ever run out of ideas? There are, places in the city I've never been. And I also just love that, sort of what you were responding to there, like, seeing people, in Woolies and all of that, the whole small town aspect of Pittsburgh, the fact that, there's only 3 degrees of separation from anyone or whatever. You can always find your way. I think my mother told me that really early on. She said, you can't do anything in this town that I won't find out about.
And she was right.
It's a beautiful place. And I think part of that is the fact that some people who don't live here don't expect that. Pittsburgh's reputation, I mean, people still think of it as this dirty old steel town,
yeah.
Which we haven't been for a long time.
But you left for 16 years.
I left for 16 years. I went to school in North Carolina, and then I got my first job in South Carolina. But again, through a Pittsburgh connection, I heard that Josie Carey was doing a children's show in South Carolina, and I remembered her from WQED here in Pittsburgh. I mean, I didn't know her. I just remembered that she did Children's Corner when I was a kid at WQED. That was the first program ever produced at WQED, Children's Corner. And, because of that, I wrote her a letter. She responded. I went down on my spring break, met her, and they said, okay, we think we'll take you on for the summer. And I was a summer intern. This is the one that really gets me. 50 years ago, the summer of 1973, I first worked for a PBS station. I worked for South Carolina Educational Television. So,
but what made you? What drove the desire to come back, to use those connections and to bring you back? What drove you to come back?
Nothing. I had no desire to come back. I was working in South Carolina for 11 years. My station there had just sent me to Australia for 28 days. I mean, it was incredible. I was having a great time. Of course, that's when you hear that, something will come up. And a guy that I had worked with in South Carolina who had moved on to Denver called me one day and said, "Hey, Rick, there's a job in Broadcasting Magazine you should apply for." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's at WQED in Pittsburgh." And I said, "Do I want to go back to Pittsburgh?" And he said, "You never see a big station like WQED advertising for a producer. You should send a letter and a tape." So I did. And next thing I knew, I was coming here for a job interview. And, the day I came for my job interview, they offered me the job, which was a shock.
Wow.
So I didn't have any great desire to be a boomerang, but I became one.
Yes.
And, it was really quickly I realized I didn't regret it. What I often say is when I moved back to Pittsburgh, I grew up in Bethel Park. But even as a kid, I knew how to take buses and streetcars and things like that to get around town. But I could get in a car and drive to Kennywood. But if you laid a map out in front of me and said, "Where's Kennywood?" I would have had no idea.
Good point.
I knew it was on a river because you could see the river from the train and, various other rides. But I didn't know which river that was. And where's Kennywood as far as a map is concerned? It was just something I never thought to do. So I had a lot of learning to do, but it was all fun and it was all good and, perpetually surprising. So that's why I still do it.
By the way, it's the Monongahela River, in case you need to know.
With a beautiful view of Braddock.
Yes. By the way, Rick,
that's an oxymoron.
Do you realize how cutting edge you are when you look back at the fact that you started doing things like this 36 years ago? There was no, Anthony Bourdain's, obviously, God rest his soul, Stanley Tucci doing it now. You were doing things over 36 years ago that nobody was doing. And do you ever have a wish that maybe you would have taken nationally or globally at some point?
No, I'm aware of that. You know what? If you look at my stuff, until recently, you rarely saw me. It was just my voice, which I considered like classic documentary style filmmaking. And when I came to QED, WQED was still making the National Geographic specials. And, that was huge. And they always had, Hollywood actors do the voiceovers in what we all called the voice of God. There was no real personality. And I said, I want to, do that kind of thing in that same sort of style, but with a friendly voice. And I remember, I think it was after Things That Aren't There Anymore, which is a really early show that I did. Yeah. But, a shout out to the Strand Theater in Zelienople. They've asked me to show it in November.
You should show it. That'd be awesome. I'd go.
It's sold out. A show in November. So they've booked a second one. We're going to do it at 2:00 and again at 4:30.
That's awesome.
The 4:30 show is still open. But there's just so many things that, go into all of this.
Oh, yeah.
And
you said that there were some things that you hadn't done yet.
And by the way, we'll find out what those are when we come back with Rick Sebak. This is Cars, Stars, and everything in between on 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDKA. Richard, you set me up on that so perfectly. You're like a professional.
But you cut me short.
And I lost my train of thought. I couldn't figure out where did I start that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Saving here, and here we go. And then we're going to start part 2. Thank you to everybody that's watching us live, by the way. And here we saving. All right, here we go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020 KDKA. This is Cars, Stars, and everything in between. He's the star, Richard Bazzi, Schultzford.com. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star. And our star today is a huge star. It's Rick Sebak. And Richard, I apologize. I cut you off. I apologize. So I'll let you pick it up where I cut you off.
But with Rick, there's always a cutoff because we could talk forever.
Oh, yeah.
And, all these wonderful things that Pittsburgh contains. Rick, you mentioned there's a few things maybe that you haven't done in the city that you're aware of. What haven't you done that you think you want to do?
Wow. I mean, well, immediately what comes to mind is I know that I was asked this question one time when I was at PBS down in Virginia. The headquarters for PBS are there by Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And I was doing some national shows, and they said, is there anything you've always wanted to do? And I said, yes, cemeteries of Pittsburgh.
Oh.
And they said, well, we don't want cemeteries of Pittsburgh, but we take cemeteries of the country. And so I did a show for PBS called A Cemetery Special. But people love local cemeteries more than they ever could love national cemeteries.
That is correct.
That seems so wrong.
I still think that. Oh, really? No. I think, cemeteries are a wonderful reminder that, you got to appreciate every moment. And I don't know, just, there's so much love involved. It's a good thing. I mean, it's not a scary thing. I don't want to make a scary program about cemeteries.
No, but it's funny because I was sitting here and I was looking at a magazine this morning and I looked at all these things and I see, Falling Water, the Andy Warhol Museum, things. I've never done that. I've never done any of those things.
Oh, really? Oh,
no, I never have.
No.
And Laurel Caverns, I probably haven't done Laurel Caverns since I was a kid.
I did Laurel Caverns in underground Pittsburgh. But I have a good story about Falling Water. When I left South Carolina, there was another producer there, Tim Carrier, and he had just done a half-hour documentary about, I think, 3 Frank Lloyd Wright houses in South Carolina. And like one of them was in ruins and, the others were being worked on and everything. And I have a vague recollection that the guy who owned Domino's Pizza was buying them up. He was buying Frank Lloyd Wright, properties and trying to preserve them. So when I got this job in Pittsburgh, Tim said to me, wow, you're going to be in Pittsburgh. I'm coming as soon as you get settled. I'm coming because I want to see Falling Water. And I said, I've never even been to Falling Water. So I would love that. And so Tim sent them the show he had made about Frank Lloyd Wright houses in South Carolina. They were excited. It wasn't quite as, prepared for tourists as it is now, Falling Water. There was no, visitor center and that kind of stuff, which is there now. But he had arranged that we would come and spend the day. And actually, he brought with him Herman Rich, who was a cameraman, although he wasn't shooting anything. He just also wanted to see Falling Water. So, people know this place around the world. And we went there and spent the day. I think we were the only people there. And it was wonderful. And we got, all this stuff and, tours and got to see things that people don't normally get to see. And at the end of the day, the woman who was showing us around said, is there anything you haven't seen that you want to see? And Tim said, I would like to see the house at dusk and just after. And she said, oh, no problem. Here's the keys. And when you guys leave, just leave them in the mailbox on your way out at the end of the driveway. And I said, that was such a great,
It's such a Pittsburgh thing.
Yes. Falling Water, here's the keys. So for a while, we were just like, wow, we have the keys to Falling Water.
Rick, what is something that you have discovered in southwestern Pennsylvania, something that you discovered in Pittsburgh since January 1st of 2023 that you didn't know existed prior?
Wow. I'm going to guess it has to be... Yesterday, somebody told me about a thrift store up on McKnight Road that I never knew about, and I just love thrift stores.
That's awesome.
It's called Repurposed, and it's up there near the Mad Mex on McKnight Road. So I drove up there after work yesterday just to check it out.
And did you like it?
Yeah. I mean, and it's not on purpose, but I now realize that my programs and the things that I've done tend to be a large celebration of family-owned businesses. You know, if you look at all my work, national and local, I mean, that's what I love. And so I'm trying to think of, you know, what are we find out about new businesses all the time. I don't, you know, since January, I bet that since January that I went to Fet Fisk. I don't know if you know about that. FET-FISK.
What is it?
It's a restaurant. It's a pop-up restaurant. And it's, you know, but they bought the old Lombardies in Bloomfield, and they're going to make it.
Sure.
Yeah, they're going to make it their permanent home. I think they're working on funding it and all that kind of stuff. But the food was extraordinary. And I was invited to that by Sarah Mackley. And she was the first person on my new podcast. She's there. 001 is Sarah Mackley, whom people know as the Brothmonger.
The Brothmonger, yes.
She's been making soup on the north side for quite some time. Now she's making it out of a place in Bloomfield called Time Machine.
Yes.
And, you know, she makes incredibly good soups.
So that ties right into your cemeteries, doesn't it?
Well, it ties in that she used to be a funeral director.
Yes.
Since we did the interview, when we did our interview for the Gum Bands podcast, she was still a funeral director in the South Hills.
Wow.
Oh my!
But shortly thereafter, she decided that she was doing well enough with the soup that she was going to make that her full-time business.
We need to try that place. I do know about it, and I do know about her.
Richard, we need to have her on this podcast.
Just pick up a quart of soup, you know.
Yes. What that brings to mind is no soup for you.
Well, that's why she. And if you look at her thing on Instagram, Brothmonger @Brothmonger, there's a little picture of the soup Nazi from Seinfeld.
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
That's really funny. So you talk about Gum Bands, which is your latest foray,
right?
Tell us what that is.
Well, it's a podcast, you know, and it was an experiment, and it still is, and I love it so much, just because it allows me to spend a little more time with someone and to ask, you know, a volley of questions that we share with everybody. One of the assistant editors who I've worked with for many years, Matt Conrad, listened to a couple of the early ones, and he said, this is just like me sitting in the editing room listening to your long interviews that you do for your documentaries, only everybody gets to hear everything. And he said, I always enjoyed that, and I still enjoy it. So his job would have been to take my questions out, because that's how we usually assemble my documentaries, is to line up what people say and then allow me to make connections with the voiceover. So, you know, and, you know, it's a chance to ask some people that I already know questions that you often don't get around to. Like, where are you from? And where did you grow up?
Yes.
You know, that kind of stuff.
And I love the title. I really do. Gum Bands. I love it.
Well, it's funny. I say the idea of doing a podcast was the idea of Rich Capaldi, who's my co-producer on it. And he said, you know, WQED doesn't have a podcast even, you know, if you would do it with me, we would get this done. And so I said, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I don't know, just started to think about it. And I said, well, if we could call it Gum Bands, I'd be in.
That's awesome.
Because, you know, it's one of those Pittsburgh words that I like. There's some words I don't care. I mean, Yins is so big, but I don't care about Yins. But I love Nebby. I did a whole series of programs called Nebby, and now I'm doing a podcast called Gum Bands. And, you know, we're still looking for additional funding. And if we got enough funding, what I would like to do is make a new television documentary called Gum Bands that would, you know, highlight some of the things that we're highlighting in this podcast. So some of these people who have small businesses, we did a story with the Steel City Salt Company in Millvale. I don't know if you know them, but John Turallo and his wife Candy, it's just a great place. They make a salt. called Trinidad Scorpion Salt. It's very, very spicy. I love it. I carry a small envelope.
Write that down. We will try that.
I mean, I just love spicy things, and it's really, you know, I mean, I always have it in my kitchen, and you know, literally, if I go to a restaurant, I say, oh, I forgot to bring my Trinidad Scorpion Salt. But we did an interview with them and found out about it. I mean, so many things. Their courtship in the Strip. He was working in the Strip, and actually, their business started as a table on a corner on Saturdays and Sundays in the Strip.
Wow.
Now they have a brick and mortar store over in Millvale called Steel City Salt Company. But, you know, that's the kind of thing that I love to find and to ask questions like, why did this happen? And, you know, how did this get started? And why salt? And why, you know, all of that. And so I also did an interview with Jared Evans, who's a guy I met when we were both in a wedding. He was in the wedding party and I was the officiant over at the Children's Museum. And we just started talking, and he asked me if I do an announcement on his voicemail, you know, and just say, hey, Jared's not here right now. So I did that, and we just hit it off, and we you know, and then we started occasionally going out to lunch together. And then I found out more about what he does, and he runs a trivia company called Radical Trivia in bars around town. So I think like on Wednesdays, he's at OTB or on the South Side, and he does Ruggers, and he does one in Carnegie, and you know, he does a very flamboyant kind of trivia game. He's quite a character, and you know, I enjoyed being able to ask him some of those questions. So it's just that thing. And the last 2 episodes we did were a guy that I hired 5 years ago to do the music for my Nebby series. And I called him because Chris Fenimore, our cook on WQED, who does QED Cooks, he heard me saying, like, I got to find somebody to write some music because, you know, so we can use canned music, but I always like if there's any money involved, you know, enough money to entice somebody to compose some music. He said, call Tom Roberts. I think he might be interested. And Tom is a pianist and composer who lives in Spring Garden and maybe in Spring Hill. Spring Hill, yeah. He lives up top because he has this incredible view off this deck. He worked for many years with Leon Redbone, whom I loved. I don't know if you know the music of Leon Redbone, but he was, you know, sort of specialized in that old-timey sound and an interesting character. And I first saw him on Saturday Night Live back in the 70s. Oh, wow. But then Tom worked with him for many years. Unfortunately, Leon Redbone has passed away. But Tom also worked with Martin Scorsese on the Aviator movie. And he's, you know, something came up about Loudon Wainwright and Rufus Wainwright, whom I also like very much as artists. And Tom said, oh, yeah, I worked with them one time. We were in the studio making fun of them and everything. And so, you know, I learn everything. That's the best thing about my job is I'm continually learning.
I'd love to have a camera follow you around for one day.
Absolutely. Rick Sebak, thank you for joining us for Cars, Stars, and everything in between. You are an absolute blessing for the city of Pittsburgh.
Thank you.
You really are, Rick. And I'll say this.